Plant and animal production are directly linked to the climate in which they exist. Despite human intervention, climate, soil types, and the levels of precipitation still govern what types of crops will be grown and what types of animals will be raised. Climate always has, and will continue to play a major role in determining what types of agriculture will take place throughout the world. Most of the Earth's land surface supports some type of agriculture activity. The few exceptions are in the high latitudes around the North and South Poles and the high altitudes like the tops of mountains. Climate influences what agricultural activities will take place. For example, animal herding takes place in drier climates such as the western United States. However, animal herding can vary greatly depending on economic factors. In pastoral nomadism, a form of subsistence agriculture practiced in the developing world, people travel from place to place with their herds of domesticated animals. In contrast, in ranching, a form of commercial agriculture found in the developed world, livestock graze over large areas while the owners remain in the same place. Crops and livestock thrive best in specific types of bioclimates, so each bioclimatic zone is home to different types of agriculture. As previously stated, pastoral nomadism is practiced in arid and semi-arid climates throughout the world. Nomads rely on the animals for survival. Animals such as cattle, camels, reindeer, goats, yaks, sheep, and horses provide meat and sometimes milk for food and hides for clothing and shelter. Pastoral nomads move their herds to different pastures within their territory and often trade meat for crops with nearby subsistence crop farmers. Nomads in different regions rely upon different animals depending on their culture and the climate in which they live. Subsistence agriculture, in which farmers, usually in tropical climate regions, move from one field to another, is called shifting cultivation. It's also known as slash-and-burn agriculture because farmers sometimes clear the land by burning vegetation, a process that enriches nutrient-poor soil by adding nitrogen to it. On the cleared land, they plant and harvest crops until the soil becomes less fertile. Then, the people move to another area of dense wild vegetation and repeat the process. Unlike crop rotation, in which farmers change which crops are grown within a field, shifting cultivation often involves using entirely new fields. Farmers using shifting cultivation grow crops such as rice in Southeast Asia, maize in South America, and millet and sorghum in sub-Saharan Africa. One of the legacies of colonialism was the replacement of subsistence farming with commercial agriculture in many less developed regions. A plantation is a large commercial farm that specializes in one crop, usually found in the low latitudes or the tropics, and in hot, humid climates with substantial precipitation. Plantations are typically labor-intensive and often exploit the cheap labor available in nearby villages and towns. In order to reduce the cost of transporting bulky crops, some of the processing occurs near the plantation. The valuable portion of the crop is then transported to global markets. Common plantation crops include coffee, cocoa, rubber, sugarcane, bananas, tobacco, tea, coconuts, and cotton. Mixed crop and livestock farming is an integrated system common in developed regions, such as the Midwestern United States, but it has also diffused to many parts of the developing world. On these farms, the majority of the crops raised are fed directly to livestock. The livestock is fattened on these grains for eventual slaughter, or the grains are fed to dairy cows. The animal's manure is in turn used to help fertilize the crops. The owners of the land and livestock may be different people, but what is important is the interrelationship among them. The most common grains used for these purposes in the United States are corn and soybeans. Each can be used for animal feed, processed into oil, or used to make other products. In regions too dry for mixed crop agriculture, farmers often raise wheat. Consumed mostly by people, wheat is produced in the prairies and plains. China, India, and Russia are the world's top wheat producers, with the United States coming in fourth. In the United States, commercial gardening and fruit farming, known as market gardening, is found mostly in California and the Southeast in order to take advantage of long growing seasons. Today, most of the products are sold to companies for canning and freezing. Fruits and vegetables grown in the United States that are the result of market gardening include lettuce, broccoli, apples, oranges, and tomatoes. Traditionally, dairies and creameries were local farms and businesses supplying dairy products to customers in a small geographic area. This pattern still exists in many less developed regions of the world. However, during the latter part of the 20th century, improvements in refrigeration and transportation expanded the milk shed, the geographic distance that milk is delivered. Large corporate dairy operations replaced smaller family-owned farms, which has resulted in a decrease in the number of farms, but an increase in dairy production. Most commercial dairy farms are located in the United States, Canada, Europe, and other highly developed countries near urban centers and transportation corridors. Mediterranean agriculture is practiced in regions with hot, dry summers, mild winters, narrow valleys, and often some type of irrigation system. Common crops grown in Mediterranean agriculture include figs, dates, olives, and grapes. Herders in these regions often practice transhumance, the seasonal herding of animals from higher elevations in the summer to lower elevations in valleys in the winter. Because the regions have rugged terrain, goats and sheep are the principal livestock. Livestock ranching is a commercial grazing of animals confined to a specific area. Similar to pastoral nomadism, livestock ranching is found in areas that are too dry for growing crops in large quantities. Ranching is a prevalent agricultural activity in the western United States. Among the many factors that influence the decisions farmers make about how to farm are the relative costs of land, labor, and capital. Because of these different costs, farmers balance the use of these resources differently. If land is plentiful and costs little, they use it extensively. If land is scarce or expensive, they use it intensely. Agriculture that uses fewer inputs of capital and paid labor relative to the amount of space being used is extensive farming. It includes practices such as shifting cultivation, nomadic herding, and ranching. Agriculture that involves greater inputs of capital and paid labor relative to the space being used is intensive farming. Intensive practices are used in various regions and conditions. Paddy rice farming in South, Southeast, and East Asia is very labor intensive. However, the nature of the fields, often on terraces, can make using machinery difficult. Market gardening in California, Texas, and Florida are near large cities is sometimes capital intensive, but it's nearly always labor intensive. Many vegetables and fruit farms use large number of migrant workers to tend and harvest crops. These workers are traditionally paid low wages. The largest scale of intensive agriculture occurs on plantations in low latitudes. One technique to maximize output on a small amount of land is double cropping, the planting and harvesting on the same parcel of land twice per year. Extensive and intensive farming methods can be used for either subsistence or commercial purpose. Some agricultural products combine extensive and intensive phases. Raising cattle in Wyoming is an example of extensive farming. The cattle roam and feed on grass in large ranches that average nearly 6 square miles in size. As the cattle reach maturity, the intensive phase begins. Farmers transport the cattle to feedlots known as concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, in northern Colorado. The density of animals is high, and the cattle are fed corn and water in order to fatten them up before being processed into meat for the market. The global expansion of fast food operations, along with increased demand for meat, has led to larger ranching operations not only in the United States, but in South America as well. In the United States, the competition for space, animal size, and raising time have led to the creation of feedlots, which are confined spaces in which cattle and hogs have limited movement. Because of their reduced movement, animals gain weight faster and require less room. The economic structure of livestock raising has changed in the past few decades. The increased demand for beef, poultry, and pork has created factory farms and processing centers. Cattle are less likely to graze on large expanses of land, but instead are raised in feedlots or CAFOs. The animals can grow bigger in a shorter period of time. This new practice maximizes the use of space and prepares the animal for slaughter quickly, thus maximizing profit. Agribusiness is the integration of various steps of production in the food processing industry. It not only includes large-scale commercial agriculture, but also the steps of processing and production, transportation, marketing, retail, and research and development. Given the enormity of this system, agribusiness operations are performed by transnational corporations. These large-scale operations are commercial, highly mechanized, and much of the raising of crops and animals involves chemicals and biotechnology. Globalization has accelerated the growth of agribusiness during the latter half of the 20th century. Competition in agricultural products and services has encouraged large-scale farming operations, thus eliminating many small-scale operations. Even family-owned and operated farms are corporations far larger than the farms of the past. This system of resources, producer transportation, communication, information, and consumers is referred to as the supply chain, or a commodity chain. Often these supply chain businesses are owned by one corporation. Vertical integration is when a company owns several smaller businesses involved in different steps in developing a product. A vertically integrated agribusiness might include one company that contracts with farmers to raise the crop, a trucking firm that transports the crop, a factory that processes it, and a wholesaler that distributes it to stores. This gives the company control over most of the product development process. Large-scale farming usually practices monoculture, which is the raising of a single cash crop on large plots of land. Family farmers in developed countries and subsistence farmers in developing countries cannot compete with large-scale farming operations because large-scale farming produces food at a cheaper per-unit cost. Many projects funded by the World Bank have encouraged agribusiness ventures in the developing world, often at the expense of subsistence farmers. As a consequence of globalization and the Green Revolution, many subsistence farmers have lost available land and now work for agribusiness enterprises. The transformation of agriculture into large-scale agribusiness entity has resulted in a complex system of connecting producers and consumers at a global scale. This complex and enormous system enables someone who lives in a small American town to consume bananas from Ecuador, coffee from Brazil, chocolate from Switzerland, and apples from Honduras. This transformation may be attributed to advances in biotechnology, mechanization, transportation, and food preservation. A commodity chain is a process used by corporations to gather resources and transform them into goods and then transport them to consumers. Because of improvements in agricultural technology, advances in transportation, and an increasingly globalized economy, farmers can raise crops and animals far from their final market, and consumers can still purchase the final products at low prices. Corn has numerous uses, such as livestock feed, sweetener, or fuel, and the commodity chain for each use would be more specialized and complex.